What is commonly labeled as laziness is more accurately described as cognitive and emotional overload, caused by unresolved commitments, unclosed decisions, and internalized self expectations. Rather than a failure of discipline or motivation, chronic inaction and fatigue often represent a protective response by the nervous system. Understanding this distinction is essential for cultivating a well lived life that prioritizes integration over pressure. Laziness is one of the most frequently used explanations for underperformance, procrastination, and lack of follow through. It is also one of the least examined. People routinely describe themselves as lazy despite caring deeply about improvement, growth, and responsibility. This contradiction raises an important question. If laziness implies indifference, why is it so often accompanied by guilt, self criticism, and mental exhaustion? So, this paper proposes that most instances of perceived laziness are not caused by a lack of effort or character, but by the accumulation of unresolved psychological weight. Unfinished weight refers to internal burdens that remain active within a person's cognitive and emotional system, despite no longer being actionable or relevant. These burdens commonly include conversations that were never resolved or properly ended, decisions that were postponed but never consciously released, identities or life plans that once felt necessary but were never formally let go. Although these are intangible, these elements exert real pressure. Each unfinished item occupies mental space, demands periodic attention, and continues to an ongoing sense of obligation. And over time, the accumulation of such weight produces a persistent feeling of heaviness that precedes action itself. People often wake up already tired, not because the day is demanding, but because their internal system is already overloaded. When individuals experience difficulty initiating tasks, they often default to moral explanations. Laziness becomes the label of choice. However, laziness in its truest sense does not involve guilt. It does not involve self surveillance. It does not involve a continuous concern with becoming better. So, in contrast, individuals experiencing overload often report constant internal pressure to improve, frustration of themselves for not doing more, avoidance paired with self judgment. And these characteristics indicate not apathy, but saturation. At a certain threshold, the mind begins to resist additional inputs. Procrastination, distraction, and avoidance function as containment strategies rather than failures of will. The human nervous system does not distinguish sharply between physical and psychological load. It responds to perceived pressure regardless of its source. So when the mind is filled with unresolved shoulds, lingering obligations, and internal narratives of inadequacy, the body responds by slowing down. And this slowdown is not necessarily sabotage, it is a protective measure. So reducing output becomes a way to prevent further overload. And this explains why individuals who care deeply about their goals can feel increasingly incapable of acting on them. The system is not broken, it is compensating. Modern frameworks of self improvement emphasize discipline, motivation, and productivity. They rarely address closure. People are taught how to plan, optimize, and push forward, but they are not taught how to consciously end a chapter without resentment, forgive a version of themselves that made sense at the time, release goals that no longer align without interpreting it as failure, and more. As a result, expectations linger long after they are useful. These expectations behave like unpaid debts, quietly accruing interest in the form of fatigue and resistance. So, a well lived life is not built through constant escalation of effort, it is built through integration. Integration involves recognizing what has already taught its lesson and no longer needs to be carried. This does not require denial or avoidance, it requires acknowledgement followed by release. So, not every plan must be completed, not every intention must be fulfilled, not every past version of the self must remain accountable forever. Progress often begins not with action, but with subtraction. So, what many people interpret as laziness is more accurately understood as the cumulative effect of unfinished internal weight. Relief does not come from harsher discipline or increased pressure, it comes from understanding what is being carried unnecessarily and allowing it to be set down properly. The most constructive shift that a person can make is moving from a self accusation to self understanding. So, this shift does not reduce your responsibility, it restores your capacity.